cold January night in 2019, a young woman named Miriam Vallejo left her home to walk her dogs. It was a routine she had done countless times before. 20 minutes later, she would be found dying on the ground, the victim of a brutal and savage attack. What happened in those 20 minutes would spark one of Spain's most perplexing criminal investigations. A case with 90 stab wounds, 4 dogs that didn't bark, and a prime suspect who walked free. A case that was closed, then mysteriously reopened 6 years later with new evidence that changed everything. This is the story of Miriam Vallejo and the search for justice that continues to this day. Miriam Vallejo was born on August 9, 1993 in Alcalá de Henares, Madrid, Spain. She was an only child raised by hard-working parents who poured all their love and effort into giving her the best life possible. From an early age, Miriam showed an extraordinary love for animals. She rescued cats, cared for dogs, and surrounded herself with all kinds of pets. This wasn't just a childhood phase, it was a passion that would define her entire life. Those who knew Miriam describe her as empathetic, sweet, profound, and deeply affectionate. She had a special sensitivity to everything around her and couldn't remain indifferent to suffering, whether human or animal. She was the kind of person who made the world a little brighter just by being in it. Academically, Miriam excelled. She was dedicated, respectful, and had a clear inclination toward the sciences. As a child, she dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, but life took her down a different path. She graduated as a nursing assistant and administrative manager and eventually found work as a laboratory technician at a pharmaceutical company. Her colleagues remember her as exemplary, completely dedicated to her work. Miriam was building a future for herself, working hard and saving money to achieve her dreams. One of those dreams was independence. While she loved living with her parents and felt comfortable there, like many young people, she craved her own space. She had 2 dogs and wanted a better environment for them. That's when she approached her friend Celia. Celia also had 2 dogs, so Miriam proposed they move in together. They could share a larger space where all 4 animals could live comfortably and they could split the rent. Celia loved the idea. Soon after, Celia's boyfriend, Sergio Saías, joined the plan. Sergio and Celia had met at a battery recycling company where they both worked. He was a maintenance technician, and she worked in the laboratory. The 3 of them moved into a rented house in Vilanova d'Iter, a quiet locality mainly composed of residential developments surrounded by fields and rural paths. It was a peaceful area without much activity where neighbors mostly kept to themselves. Miriam loved it there. She took full advantage of the surroundings to walk her dogs. Her usual route took her through the empty fields near her home, where she enjoyed long walks with her 4-legged companions. With these circumstances in place, we arrive at January 16th, 2019, the night that would change everything. It was around 9 o'clock at night when a young couple stumbled upon a terrible scene. On the ground lay a woman, still alive, but gravely injured and in agony. One of them immediately called emergency services, desperately explaining they had found a woman in very bad condition, lying on the ground in a solitary and difficult-to-access location. Emergency services arrived quickly, but the situation was irreversible. They couldn't do anything for the young woman who had already lost her life. Her death was certified at the scene. The victim was identified as Miriam Vallejo. Many neighbors said she had only been living in the area for a few months and hadn't become well known, just like her 2 housemates. However, they did remember seeing her walking her dogs, always calm and very discreet. According to the forensic report, she had suffered an alarming number of wounds, all caused by a bladed weapon. The attack reflected an extreme level of violence. Police immediately began questioning neighbors about what had happened that day, trying to reconstruct the last hours of Miriam's life to begin their investigation. They learned that Miriam had left her house around 8:30 that evening to walk all 4 household dogs. They were all large breeds. 2 belonged to her, and 2 to her friend Celia, who wasn't home at the time. Miriam was testing new luminous collars for the animals that night. She started walking with a group of neighbors who were also walking their dogs, but a few minutes later, she separated from them and headed toward a dirt path that connected her house to an empty field. Barely 20 minutes after leaving home, she was ambushed by her attacker. From the very beginning, investigators ruled out sexual assault. There was no evidence of that type of aggression. They also dismissed robbery as a motive since Miriam had all her belongings with her, including her cell phone. Moreover, the attack was extremely intense and targeted. This led investigators to believe there was some kind of emotional connection between Miriam and her attacker. This suspicion was confirmed when they received the forensic examination results. The findings were shocking. Miriam had received a total of 90 wounds inflicted by 2 different knives. Most of the wounds were superficial. The first strikes were to her back and abdomen, indicating to authorities that the attack had begun from behind. 8 of these wounds were located in the kidney area and were considered potentially fatal, but it was one wound to the chest that ultimately caused her death. Some cuts had also reached her forehead and palate. Forensic experts calculated that the entire attack lasted approximately 10 minutes. Think about that. 10 minutes is an incredibly long time for such a violent assault. Someone should have seen or heard something. But in those first impressions, it seemed no one had. Furthermore, it was clear that Miriam had tried to defend herself. She had 2 broken nails, cuts, bruises, and signs of being dragged. There had been significant struggling, and she had put up considerable resistance, but authorities believe she couldn't escape because the attack came from behind and took her by surprise. Another detail that powerfully caught investigators' attention was that her dogs hadn't reacted or tried to defend her. Let me emphasize this again. These were large breed dogs with a strong bond to Miriam. For many people, the logical expectation was that if a stranger had attacked her, the animals would have reacted, at least by barking, to draw attention from others. But the dogs did nothing. They didn't defend her. They didn't even alert anyone to what was happening. This suggested something chilling. Miriam's attacker was someone the dogs knew, someone they trusted, someone from her inner circle. With this theory taking shape, investigators began looking closely at the people closest to Miriam. And one person immediately emerged as the prime suspect, Sergio Saías, her housemate and Celia's boyfriend. According to the initial timeline, Sergio was supposed to be at work when the crime occurred. His company confirmed he had clocked out at 8:38 p.m. The problem: the company was located in Torre Ardos, about 40 kilometers from Villanova de la. Police calculated it would take at least 45 minutes to travel between the 2 locations. Given that the attack occurred around 8:50 p.m., it seemed physically impossible for Sergio to have been at the crime scene. But then investigators made a disturbing discovery. Traffic cameras captured Sergio's vehicle near the crime scene at 8:48 p.m., just 2 minutes before Miriam was attacked. This completely contradicted his alibi. There was no way he could have made that journey in 10 minutes unless he had been driving at extremely dangerous high speeds. When confronted with this evidence, Sergio changed his story. He admitted he hadn't gone straight home from work that night. Instead, he claimed he had driven to a nearby town to meet with a supposed dealer to buy hashish. But police found this explanation suspicious. Why would he travel so far for drugs? And more importantly, he couldn't provide the name or any details about this alleged dealer. On May 21, 2019, 4 months after Miriam's death, police executed a search warrant at Sergio's parents' home in Alcalá de Henares. The search was thorough and methodical. They were looking for the murder weapons, blood-stained clothing, anything that could link Sergio to the crime. What they found was concerning. In his car's trunk, they discovered a machete. In the house, they found several knives and other bladed weapons. They also seized numerous items of clothing that could potentially contain forensic evidence. The day after the search, Sergio was arrested and brought in for questioning, but Sergio invoked his right to remain silent. He refused to answer any questions about the night Miriam died. Despite his silence, police believed they had enough circumstantial evidence to hold him. On May 23, 2019, Sergio was ordered into provisional detention without bail. The judge cited clear indications against him and considered him a flight risk. For the family of Miriam, this felt like progress. Finally, someone was being held accountable, but their relief would be short-lived. As the investigation continued, cracks began to appear in the case against Sergio. First, there was the question of his appearance immediately after the crime. According to witnesses, Sergio didn't have any visible scratches, wounds, or injuries. Remember, Miriam had fought back desperately, breaking nails and struggling violently with her attacker. Forensic experts found tissue under her fingernails, suggesting she had scratched her assailant. Yet Sergio showed no signs of such an encounter. Then there was the matter of forensic evidence, or rather, the lack of it. Despite seizing bags full of clothing from Sergio's home, forensic analysis found no trace of Miriam's DNA on any of his garments. No blood, no skin cells, nothing. For an attack as violent and prolonged as Miriam's, this seemed almost impossible. How could someone stab another person 90 times over 10 minutes and not have any trace of the victim on their clothing? The investigation took another strange turn when Celia, Sergio's girlfriend and Miriam's housemate, began sharing peculiar information. In messages to Sergio's brother, Celia claimed that Sergio's clothing from the night of the crime had been burned. She suggested she had insider knowledge about the case. When questioned by detectives, Celia had a bizarre explanation. She claimed her statements came after consulting with a psychic who had revealed information to her. Investigators found her claims to be baseless and unhelpful to the investigation. On September 20th, 2019, the decision to keep Sergio in provisional detention was upheld with authorities stating there were clear indications against him. But after spending 4 months in prison, everything changed. On December 20th, 2019, Sergio was released. The judge explained that they hadn't been able to gather sufficient evidence to sustain the charges. The court had received a report from the Civil Guard's Biology Department detailing analyses performed on clothing seized from Sergio's parents' home. Not a single garment contained any genetic profile matching Miriam. Sergio was freed without bail, with only the conditions that his passport be confiscated and that he report to the courthouse weekly. After his release, Sergio declared he felt relieved and very satisfied. For Miriam's family, it was devastating. In December 2020, the investigation took an unexpected turn. A man named Alberto, who had various addiction issues, entered a rehabilitation center in Madrid and spontaneously began talking about Miriam's death, providing details that caught authorities' attention. Alberto had previously been in prison for assaulting someone and crashing his car into his own mother's house. During his time in prison, he had crossed paths with Sergio. During his 10 days at the rehabilitation center, Alberto told his fellow residents that he couldn't sleep at night, claiming he had done something extremely serious that prevented him from resting. Agents analyzed his possible involvement in the case, but determined his statements lacked substance and didn't provide concrete evidence. He was completely ruled out as a possible perpetrator. Meanwhile, Miriam's family was going through profound grief, marked not only by pain, but by the desperate need for answers. In the town where her parents lived, concentrations and tributes were organized in her memory. At these events, her loved ones demanded justice. They wanted to know what had happened. They felt frustrated and distrustful, beginning to point out the lack of clarity in the investigation and the confusion generated by some actions of the authorities. There were many contradictions, many alibis that didn't quite fit, and the feeling that the family had been completely deceived. According to the family, what made everything harder was remembering that Sergio had been by their side during their darkest moments, offering comfort and support while they no longer had Miriam. Nothing new emerged until January 2023, when the judge overseeing the case decided to archive it, ruling there wasn't sufficient evidence to identify a responsible party. According to her assessment, there were no grounds to maintain the accusation against Sergio. The prosecutor, however, warned that this explanation was insufficient and supported an appeal filed by the private prosecution, insisting that the case's closure needed better justification. Meanwhile, Sergio's defense announced they would seek compensation for damages suffered, arguing that the detention and precautionary measures had destroyed his life and that of his family. Among their claims was the fact that Sergio's father had been suffering from cancer, and the stress from the case had completely aggravated his condition. He died a few weeks later. They were also requesting the return of Sergio's belongings, including the machete, his car, and quite a bit of clothing that had been seized. His lawyer said they planned to demand compensation from the state and various media outlets exceeding 300,000 euros. Miriam's family, of course, continued to demand justice. The case was officially archived. It seemed like it was over, but then something extraordinary happened. In July 2025, more than 6 years after Miriam's death, the case was suddenly reopened. The decision to restart the investigation was based on new evidence that, due to secrecy laws, has not yet been revealed. Authorities stated, "There are traces. There are indications right now that point to or allow us to reactivate this investigation. Everything suggests that the new leads could be connected to a key piece of intelligence." Among the initial witnesses, one person stood out who claimed to have heard voices in the silence of that night. This witness was supposedly near the area on the day of the events and didn't see anything, but they did hear the desperate screams of a young woman who was saying, "Let me go and leave me alone." The use of plural commands in their account immediately caught attention, suggesting that more than one person had participated in the attack. Authorities explained that among all the information received, there were indications to reactivate the investigation. They assured everyone that each investigative line would start from scratch, unrelated to what had already been done. The first thing done in this new phase was a reconstruction of the events at the location where Miriam's body was found. This involved the homicide unit, forensic laboratory units, drones, and even the canine service. The recreation started from the house where Miriam lived and followed the route to the point where she was found. A civil guard officer played the role of Miriam and made the journey accompanied by 4 dogs, very similar to those she had. At the exact location of the crime, the officer repeated the same words that, according to the witness who spoke with authorities, Miriam had said that night, "Let me go and leave me alone." In this new investigative line, Sergio has been cleared, which represents a significant change in the case's focus. Additionally, the judge requested that forensic experts expand their reports to identify whether more people had been involved. At this moment, Miriam's family faces this reopening with hope. They admit it's a very difficult process, but they trust they will soon have positive results. The family insists they won't rest until the person or persons responsible for taking Miriam's life are identified and brought to justice. The new leads open a window of hope in the case, but many questions still remain unanswered. Who killed Miriam Vallejo? Was it one person or multiple attackers? Why did the dogs not react? What really happened in those 10 minutes? The case remains open, and justice remains pending. Miriam was only 25 years old when her life was brutally taken from her. She was a young woman full of dreams, compassion, and love for the living beings around her. She deserved to live a long, fulfilling life surrounded by the animals she loved and the family who cherished her. Her memory must remain alive, not just as a victim of an unsolved crime, but as a reminder of why justice matters. Every victim deserves answers. Every family deserves closure. As this investigation continues, we can only hope that the truth will finally come to light, and that whoever is responsible for this horrific act will face the consequences of their actions. This is the story of Miriam Vallejo, a story that isn't over yet. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you can be the first to hear about such real-life stories.